and welcome to CBC Alumni Focus. I'm Rob Stagnenborg, the Alumni Director, and I am very excited and very pleased to have with me old friend, upperclassman, for me at least. I graduated in 1985. John Carney, class of 1981. Welcome to the shoe, as they say.
Thank you. It's good to be back. When you first reached out to me, I thought, oh my God, I still have detentions I have to work off. So the fact that this wasn't about that was very encouraging.
Yeah, that's segment 2. So we're going to get to your academic stuff segment 2. But, I really just got to say I appreciate you coming on, because certainly CBC is a school that's so, built on traditions and generations, and different people have different experiences. And certainly in the 80s, we had just a crazy experience. I was there in the early 80s. You were in the late 1970s, early 1980s. Talk about just, number one, growing up in St. Louis in the 80s, and then going to CBC, being part of all that.
Well, CBC was my last stop of 5 high schools. So it wasn't like I went from beginning to end, but halfway through my junior year and all of my senior year was at CBC. And one of the things you need to keep in mind is that when I went to school there, I had already moved out of the house, and I was living in a basement apartment in the Central West End. So it was a very different experience. Like Marie from Brother Michael's office would call me in the morning about 7 o'clock and say, John, would you mind getting up and coming to school today? And a lot of the time I would. So it wasn't typical by any means.
So I bet Mr. Landgraf and you had a lot of conversations.
I really liked Leo, and we did have a lot of conversations. But they knew that I was unsupervised outside of school. My favorite story, if you got a minute, was I had missed more than a couple of days my senior year, and Brother Michael called me and my dad in for a meeting. And Brother Michael said, look, if John is out sick, we need a note. We need to know. And my dad said to Michael, well, he doesn't live with me, so I don't know when he's sick. And I guess Michael Jordan loved him to death, but not thinking this one through, turns to me and says, well, John, if you're sick, you need to bring in a note. I said, from me? He said, yeah. I'm like, I'll make you a stack right now, and you could just post date them. So yeah, it's a wonder I got through, honestly.
Sure. And I think in when you and I used to talk in the old days, we'd get a lot of joy and a lot of giggles, a lot of laughs about those stories. But I guess on the other side, it's got to be difficult to go through that period of your life, and you're on your own and you have your own place, and it's just difficult. I know that you've had many discussions about that. So obviously people remember the wild part and the fun part, but on the other side, there's a very human side of that for you.
But as a 16-year-old and a 17-year-old or 15, however old I wasn't looking at it that way. I was looking at it, oh my God, I have so much freedom. Look at all the stuff I could do. And as I look back on it as a parent now of 4, yeah, it was sad, and that lack of supervision and discipline that I wasn't getting at home made it a little harder to get through some of their stuff. But it's also where, the influence of the Christian brothers made a giant difference, and they helped quite a bit for sure.
Talk about some of the favorite brothers you had that really kind of looked out for you, helped you out. Maybe were a little difficult to deal with, but in the end, you appreciate it. Who were some of the brothers or teachers that kind of come to mind?
hands down, of all of my schools and all of my influence, I still hold up Tom Murray as one of the biggest ones. It seems pretty weird when I tell people this, but I'm incredibly shy when it comes to public performance and public speaking. I mean, sure, it's what I do for a living, but I'm in a room alone talking to myself. That's also known as insanity. And Tom, with drama class and with speech class, he drew that out of me to where, you know, he would force me to have debates. He would like, all right, you're not going to try out for the school play. What if we just make you the host and you greet everybody when they come in and give them programs and sit them down? And he really drew me out of a shell that a lot of people find it hard to believe that I had and have.
Sure. And heard a lot of stories from Murray. Certainly won't get into his successful acting career as, you know, he did a couple feature films, B-level feature films. We always like to remind him. Stucky's Last Stand. I'm not sure if you remember that movie, but, you know, certainly in terms of the brothers and some of the you know, the way they led the way for you, who are some of the brothers that you really looked up for? Obviously, Michael Jordan, you know, everybody looks up to him, but who are some of the other brothers?
Michael was probably the biggest influence because he knew the score. I mean, he understood what my environment was outside of the school. So I think I was cut some slack. Brother Larry was the same way. I mean, there was an occasion, and I'm sure you don't want all these crazy stories about CBC alumni, but we used to go out to the airport and go to the bar at the airport because, number one, they didn't card you. And number two, at the time, it was fairly cheap, and we were 17. And there was a time we were sitting out there having cocktails at the airport bar, and Brother Larry and Brother Michael see us through the window and come walking in. And, you know, obviously they were stern about it at the time and said, you can't be doing this. But, you know, we could have been arrested probably, but they understood and they knew that it wasn't in anybody's best interest to haul us off. We were just teenagers being teenagers.
Sure. And in the 80s, you could kind of get away with a lot of that kind of thing. You weren't automatically hauled off. You know, it was, you could, I don't want to say negotiate, but certainly the cops were willing to give young people a lot more of a slack in the 80s. And today, certainly you hear stories and it's just such a different world, you know. You know, but talking about your career and getting involved with it, and certainly, you know, you had a very famous father, everybody knows that, but you know, yet you still had to kind of build your own niche and build your own way. And certainly your style is so much different than his. You know, how difficult was it to overcome that shadow? And then, you know, how do you feel you've done with it so far?
Hopefully, pretty well. It's been 36 years.
Yeah, I would think, yeah, there's a statute of limitations of living under your dad's name, I guess.
You know, we're certainly not going to say overnight success at this point. Going through high school and meeting with the guidance counselors, and my first year out of high school, I went to Maryville College and I was studying psychology and I was studying music therapy. I really had no intentions of this. And when I finally decided I was going to broadcast, part of that was inspired by my pop telling me that radio's future was over. And there was no, you know, opportunities there. So it was out of defiance. And secondly, the psychology and the music therapy had a lot more science than I had planned on. So 21st birthday, I flipped a switch on one of these microphones for the first time in Colorado, and I haven't looked back.
That's outstanding. Again, to be able to have your staying power and certainly to build your reputation here in town. doesn't come easy, especially in a town that is so difficult on media people, and specifically the radio industry. We've seen a lot of high profile people, move on, and certainly you've been a survivor. So, talk about just the business of radio, because I think your father might have been right way back when. It's just it's dying a slow death.
But, they were saying when television came along, that was going to be the end of radio. And then when cable came along, that was going to be the end of radio. And Sirius came along, and that was going to be the end of radio. But I think local talk can't be replaced by a satellite. So I think I'm in a niche, and I don't want to jinx myself. I think it's a particular niche that isn't as easy to replace with some guy out of Miami who's got a quick wit or is a good interviewer. And with my then undiagnosed ADD, it really suits me well, because I really only need to focus on any particular subject matter for about 15 minutes, and then we're on to something else completely.
Sure. Outstanding. So, I see behind you, you got your drum set. Obviously you play drums. Are you still playing with the band, or are those just collecting dust and laundry these days?
The boys actually beat on them more than I do. I still play, but about 5 years ago, I hit a pretty significant health speed bump.
Yep.
Which became 5 open heart surgeries. So getting out and playing is a little tougher.
Sure.
My wife is now working full time too, so the time factor is an issue. I still play, but not out and about, other than sitting in.
Sure.
Like I was. Yeah.
Well, speaking of, the drums, obviously covering entertainment, we've had 2 huge deaths this year, 2 icons, Neil Peart, the drummer for the band Rush, and certainly Eddie Van Halen, and certainly you being in the talk business, I'm sure those subjects have come up, and people have really grieved about them in very different ways, So, the fact that, Eddie Van Halen, we pretty much grew up with him. We've known him since we were teenagers, and he's been part of our lives. How have you been kind of handling all these people coming to you with these stories about, these 2 icons? Have you?
Interesting question.
Nobody has.
Not so much Eddie, because although he is a virtuoso of his instrument, there's no question there. I'm a diehard Deadhead and classic rock, and Van Halen didn't really fit into the original classic rock mold. They were second generation, and sadly, David Lee Roth is still recording, which doesn't do much for the legacy of that band. And who was the other one you were talking about?
Neil Peart, the drummer, Neil Peart.
Right. Neil Peart is why I took up the drums. I was incredibly sad about that. But, with the loss of people like Tom Petty and
John Prine,
we are losing these legacies. And I was thinking about how many of them are really left. The Stevie Wonders, the Paul McCartneys, the Mick Jaggers. There's only a handful of them that when they die and we look back, we'll see an incredible body of work that 50 years from now, they will still be playing on the radio and hold up as some great music. I don't think we're going to see that with Justin Bieber and Cardi B. I just don't.
I can understand. Sure. And, like you said, you mentioned your association with the band, the Grateful Dead and all that, but just the eclectic life you've lived. Talk about, being able to cover different, aspects of entertainment, some of the experiences that you've had that journalism has opened up for you that, some of your classmates might be interested in hearing. What are some of your top 3?
My top 3.
Not to put you on the spot or anything, but.
No. And I fancy myself as an interviewer first and foremost. I think that is what I do best. So some of the people that I get to talk to are so incredibly fascinating. And we click because I try not to ask what everybody else asks and draw out some elements of these people to where they're excited to have an opportunity to talk about something that they don't otherwise get asked about. So,
Sure.
and some of my favorites of those have been people that are traditionally known as being a difficult conversation. Somebody's very introverted. They don't tell, they're very private. I don't know how that's going to go. And a couple of my favorite conversations of people that I really admired, but I knew I'd have to draw out, and I did, were Steve Martin was one of those. Doesn't do a lot of interviews, but we talked for an hour and a half. Gene, help me, Young Frankenstein. Gene, very close.
Gene Wilder.
Gene Wilder, thank you. Another one, very private guy, very quiet, but we got into some things that he never really publicly discussed, and off we went. So I enjoy that stuff immensely. You know, and then there's the people that I hold up as legends in my mind, like members of the Grateful Dead or Todd Rundgren, or I talked to Robert Plant, where I just felt like I was off my game a little because I was too focused in not sounding like a giddy schoolgirl.
Sure.
You know, it's why I always laugh at that Chris Farley, Paul McCartney thing of like, so you're in the Beatles, right? Oh, stupid question. No.
John, I hope I'm not acting like a giddy schoolgirl, because it is the same feeling I'm getting right now and speaking with you and stuff.
Well, you got to get out more, Rob.
I think I do. I do notice the shirt, and it said, "Okay, Boomer." I mean, how's that for you to becoming a little bit more in touch with being a little bit of the older generation, as we say? You got kids, you know.
That is never, it stares me in the face with my kids, my boys in particular, which are 11 and 12. And they'll always throw in, oh, you know, that was before electricity. Dad, when you were playing football, were you wearing leather helmets? You know, I get that all the time. And occasionally I'll be out and about with the boys, giving mom a break, taking the kids to dinner pre-COVID. And I've had some people say, your grandkids are so well behaved. That takes me about 15 minutes to catch my breath after that. But I married a girl 13 years my senior, and I had a couple of, did your daughter have a good time as well comments. So you get used to it. And outside of that I work with Julie Buck every day, and she's 10 years my junior. Max Foisey, our producer, is more than that. And they will call me out on references I'll make, and they'll say, Abe Vigoda, how old are you? Love Boat, seriously? So I get, in fact, this is from Julie Buck, actually. So I do get those constant reminders of I'm the older sect, but my mom dying at 43 and dad dying at 52, I'm more than happy to be older.
I can imagine. Wanted to, certainly give you a chance to talk about, Carney's kids and how that's gone and how that's.
Oh, thank you.
We've got some mutual friends who are very involved and, just very proud of what you've been able to do. So you want to talk a little about what you've been able to do for St. Louis area kids?
Always. And thank you for the opportunity, Rob. I always felt that I was blessed with a job that wasn't a job. So it was my obligation to give back. So every golf tournament I would MC that I was asked, or every dinner, or you want a tour of the studio and a copy of my cookbook, whatever, it's yours, whatever you need from me. And it got to a point where I was doing, 50, 60 events a year. And even though that was a significant amount of time, I couldn't put my finger on what difference I was really making and what I was doing. And that's how Carney's Kids was born, where I had an opportunity to work a lot closer with these organizations. And, they would come and want help and they would need financing for this. It's like, okay, well, show me what you're trying to build. Show me what you need. And we've done things like gone into schools and put curriculums in place, or built sensory rooms in special school district schools, or had tandem bicycles built for some kids at Delta Gamma so they could take part in bicycle races with visual impairments. Things that I wouldn't have known if I was just hosting the auction and I helped them raise $100 grand and I had no idea what I did or who I was even doing it for. So it's been incredibly satisfying, and we have probably 22 children-based charities in St. Louis that we provide assistance to and funding to, and we've given away in over 20 years well over $1 million. So yeah, it feels great.
That's great. And before we kind of let you go, do you want to give any sort of shout outs to any of your guys in the class of 81?
Didn't care for any of them.
Build ratings here.
No, I didn't really care for any of them, honestly. No, of all the schools I went to, and there were a bunch, we don't have that kind of time. But I mean, people like Paul Brunzik and Tom Gaddy and Mike Chicky and Nick Cusimano and Scott Munden and still Ted Picaro. A good percentage of my classmates are people that I still stay in contact with. And Facebook obviously makes that world a lot smaller, but I still feel a kinship to all those people. And that was years ago. So,
I'm sorry, you missed that. What was it? The years?
Yeah, no, it's your Zoom.
Yeah.
I was going under a bridge.
Yeah, nice. Well, again, this is a CBC Alumni Focus. We want to thank you, John, for being with us. I'm going to go and stop our recording. I'll keep you on for a minute, but just want to invite everybody to come to our website, check out some of the other alumni. We're building our library of folks to talk to, but again, we're very proud of you and the support, and thankful for the support of you and your father and your entire family, John. So again, thank you for what you do for us.
And let me mention, when you get around to talking to fellow alumni Martin Kilcoyne, number one, it's not the Zoom that's adding 10 pounds. And number two, he's not nearly as interesting as this has been.
Well, he is, but I've got to tell you my favorite Martin Kilcoyne story.
No one ever says.
Well, I mean, he had just come to town, had a lot of, yeah, exactly, had a lot of fanfare, had just replaced Pete Peterson was kind of a big deal around town. So he came in, we're giving him a tour, and we go by Joel Delfa's room. And Joel Delfa and, Martin's like, oh, Mr. Delfa and I were really, really close. He's going to be happy to see me. So Delfa looks at him, kind of looks at him up and down. He goes, what are you doing these days? He's like, oh, well, I'm the, sports host for Fox 2, the TV station here in town, as if Joel's never heard of the TV station, which we're not quite sure he ever had. He goes, oh, yeah, and just kind of walked. Could have been more unimpressed. So if you can't impress Joel Delfa, what have you done?
Mr. Delfa just went up about 5 spots in my list of people. Right, it was there.
The best call out ever. So, but anyway, John, thanks again. We'll catch up with you, and continued health to you and your family, and stay safe through this COVID time.
I will. Thanks so much for the time, Rob.